who may not be able to join us this afternoon. And we're going to leave plenty of time for questions because we anticipate that our students are going to want to ask questions and have them answered by the experts. So without further ado, I'm going to switch spots here and Linnea is going to take over. Let's turn the camera off so I can.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're really excited for the program today. I first just want to start with having all of our the firms that are with us introduce themselves. So we're going to really go in no particular order. But Jessie, can you introduce yourself and your firm?
Absolutely. Hi, my name is Jessie Pardee. I am the recruiting coordinator at Bond, Shunick and King. Do you want me to talk a little bit about?
Yeah, can you? Yes,
Okay.
that would be great. Can you?
Yeah,
just talk a little bit about the firm. Thank you.
Yeah, we're a mid-sized firm, approximately 285 lawyers across 15 offices. We have several offices across New York State, a few smaller offices in Florida, Kansas City, and Boston. But although we have 15 offices, our recruiting is primarily for 8 or 9 offices, including Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, Albany, New York City, White Plains, Garden City, Melville, and Naples, Florida. Our larger offices tend to be the upstate and Western New York offices, and our headquarters are here in Syracuse. And with respect to our summer programs, our smaller offices tend to only have one summer law clerk, so it tends to be a competitive process for especially downstate.
Great, thank you. And Yadida, do you want to introduce yourself and your firm?
Sure. Hi, I'm Yadida. I'm the Director of Legal Recruiting at Cahill, Gordon, and Rindell in New York. And we have 3 offices at Cahill. We have one in New York, one DC, and one London. And we really only do recruiting for our New York office. And we have a pretty big summer group, yearly, kind of in comparison to how small our big law firm is. So this summer we have 43 summers that will be joining us. We are a relatively smaller firm for what you consider big law. We're comprised of 78 partners, 42 counsel, about 185 associates and staff. We're generally kind of a homegrown firm. So, we don't really do too much experienced attorney recruiting. We like to hire from law school. So excited to be here.
Great, thank you so much. Megan, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and the firm?
Hey, I'm Megan Frederick from Harder, Seacrest, and Emory. We have offices in Rochester and Buffalo, and we have a small office with 3 attorneys in Albany, actually. We have total about 125 attorneys. Our Rochester office is the biggest one with just under 100 attorneys, and then our Buffalo has about 30 attorneys sitting there. And we usually have about 8 summer associates, and I think that's all.
Great, thank you. And let's see. Who else do we have? Leila and Sandra. Sandra, I think you're on the call. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sandra Langs. I'm the Director of Professional Development at Phillips Lytle, and I'm here with my colleague, Jeff Schwartz, who's a partner in the Albany office. And I think Jeff is going to give you a short introduction to what we're all about. Jeff?
Great. Thank you both. Sandy will keep me honest if I go off the base here. Jeff Schwartz, I am a partner at Phillips Lytle. I'm also Albany Law School class of before most of you were born. We're also a largely New York-based firm. These days, over a couple hundred lawyers because we've been sort of a hiring tear. Buffalo, Rochester, Albany, New York City, Garden City, a little DC, a little outpost in Canada at a community technology hub, and now a new Chicago office just because that's the way things are shaping out. We do put summers all across the firm, and I'm sort of excited to talk to you all about it because I've been in that same position, both big law, medium law, and sort of all across the spectrum. So hopefully we'll have a pretty robust dialogue.
Great, thank you both. And Angela, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and your firm?
Sure thing. Hi, everyone. My name is Angela Elignani. I'm the Director of Legal Recruiting at Stewart & Kissel. which is a firm that is located in downtown New York City by Battery Park. We also have an office in DC. Our attorney composition is about 150 attorneys with perhaps 40 partners and then associates and some counsel who are summer hiring for the New York and DC offices. For New York this year, we have 17 summer associates and 2 for DC, and we'll probably be looking for a comparable summer class for summer 24, if not a little bigger, as we're looking to grow the firm. And our marquee practice areas are investment management, maritime, and general corporate, although we do have litigation as well and other litigation practices underneath that umbrella. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much. So the first thing we wanted to talk about is kind of the general hiring timeline, sort of give everyone an idea of when applications start and the process. Some employers have different timelines kind of depending on where they fall in the programs. So with our program, Albany Law, we do a virtual program, like a summer recruitment interview program. And the application upload timeline for that is July 3rd to July 6th. And students are able to view who is part of our virtual program starting June 1st. So the firms that have chosen to join our specific program, that'll begin June 1st. So all this information is kind of to get you ready to start thinking about it. But there are firms that may have other timelines. Would any of our representatives like to speak about their timeline if it's different than the Albany Law timeline?
I can start the conversation on this front.
Sure. Thanks.
I would say as a general matter, looking at Albany's OCI dates this year, they're what I would call early. You're on the early part of the OCI schedule. So I think that's a very good thing for all the students who are listening. I'd also say that if you have some interest in a particular firm and you want to apply outside the OCI process, certainly we read every application that comes our way and give it attention. So you won't be hurt by doing it. I would say that if you go outside the OCI process, you should make clear why you are applying outside the OCI process and to the particular firm, because there really should be a reason why you're not, why you're doing it. But I think if you stick with the school's OCI process, you will be sufficiently in the zone for, I think, not only our firm, but the firms that are represented here today. So that's my view.
Sure. Thank you so much. Does anyone else, does any of our other representatives want to add anything to that?
Hi, I'm happy to add to that actually. So I agree with all that has been said. I do think this year is a bit of an interesting year for some of like the big law firms. Cahill has, typically participated in Albany OCI. We love Albany students. We've had a lot of success with y'all. But this year, we've, had a bit of a shift in our recruiting timeline. And so we are planning on opening up, early applications in May to students that, really are interested in Cahill. I think, you should consider this sort of like early admissions to college. If you know of a firm that you're very interested in, that and they're accepting resumes early, then by all means throw your hat in the ring. But I think if you're one of those students that want to test the waters and see what's out there, that's perfectly fine. But perhaps OCI is better suited for you because you'll just be able to explore more. But if you are targeted and you know what you want and you don't need to see what else is out there, then perhaps recruiting is something that you'd be interested in. We are also participating in a resume collect through Albany. So for those who are faint of heart and can't tolerate the risk, there is a resume collect, and we'll be reviewing all of those as well.
And if I could just ask an additional question to Yadita's information. So Yadita, could you tell us too, for students who decide to apply early to Cahill through the recruiting process. The offer stage, and we'll get into this a little bit further. We'll talk about offers, acceptances a little later, but this does then come with a different timeline in terms of that. Is that correct?
That's correct. We're still working out some of the specifics on our end, but you know, I think it's safe to assume that, you know, if you did receive an offer from us early, you would have 21 days to accept, which would mean that you are not going to be able to take your offer into OCI, which is why it's so important to kind of have a general idea of what you're looking for if you do participate in pre-recruiting. I think that's probably the case for any firm that's pre-recruiting, because we all have to manage our numbers, and it's really hard to do that if we have open offers you know, while we're going into OCI, because then we have, you know, 2 sets of offers to manage, and you know, we wish we could have classes of 500, but we won't have jobs if that happens. So you know, it's really just, you know, it's kind of, you know, not it's I think student dependent. You know, not everybody is the same, and so what works for one person may not work for the other, but the timeline definitely will, you know, should you throw your hat in the ring early, we will expect you to make an offer decision, you know, early as well.
Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Does anyone else have anything they want to add about the timeline hiring sort of? No. Okay, thank you. And just because when I was first learning about this, because you know, it's newer for me on this side of things, OCI is, we also are referring to it as our virtual summer program, just because of the fact that interviews aren't really on campus anymore. But so if you hear both of those, it's really the same concept. But I know I had to wrap my head around that a little bit coming back in. So for any students, just to make sure everyone's kind of on the same page with that. So we have our timeline, obviously. Now, I mean, really what we want to also talk to you about is, you know, how to apply the best way that you can be a candidate and prepare your documents and get ready to apply. And Jeff from Phillips Lytle was going to talk a little bit to us about sort of the different idea of firm sizes, and that big law doesn't necessarily mean big city, is something that he wanted to discuss. So Jeff, do you want to take it away?
Yeah, thank you, Lydia. So I personally practice transactionally. So that's corporate banking, mergers and acquisitions. I do a lot of work with technology and startup companies, which is kind of fun to see some neat stuff. And on the admin side, I'm also co-chair of our lateral recruiting committee. So this is sort of a space that's near and dear to me. I kind of recall when I was coming out of law school, the world seemed sort of bifurcated. There was, you know, big law, big city, you know, huge firms, and then maybe, you know, specifically in an Albany area, there was public interest, maybe a district attorney's office. But, you know, there's a handful of regional firms, many of whom are represented here. But I don't think a great sense of sort of understanding the marriage of really good, and when I mean good, sort of cool law, to the extent we want to do this for a living, and sort of lifestyle in the area here. And I did some big law. I came out of school. I went down to the city where I'm from before I ran back up here to live in Saratoga and never looked back. But there are firms, and many of them on here, where you can have that mix of working with really smart people, really sophisticated work, and sort of still stay in this area. And I don't know that people just sort of understand that you can do that. And I just wanted sort of, when we had prepped for this, to make that point clear, that you can really do sophisticated stuff with really smart people who, you know, are at some good sized firms that sort of go toe to toe. And some of these here, you know, in the 200 lawyer firms, that's AmLaw 250 or somewhere close. Know exactly what the numbers are. They're fluid. But you can have a pretty sophisticated level of practice and sort of balance that life. And it doesn't mean you can't get it elsewhere. And I'm not opposed to big cities, but you know, we'll get into later about sort of doing the diligence on the firms, but you should, you know, be aware that that's a real option. It's not just, you know, a few people who used to handle traffic tickets, or they do some real estate. And again, nothing against it. That's all part of, you know, the practice. We all need to, you know, people need to get representation, but you should understand sort of the opportunity that's in front of you as well. It's not for everybody, but you should be aware that that's a really viable option. I just don't know how much is out there about it. That's where I, you know, make a living, and I want to proselytize about it, because it's good people, it's good work, it's good work. So thank you for that little window to talk about that, Lydia.
Sure, thank you. I appreciate that. And we'll certainly have time for questions at the end, but if anyone has questions, now, or if you've heard anything and you want to add it, please, please feel free to ask. So I think one thing that we, really want to focus on when we're applying is our where, like how we're going to apply, where we're looking, kind of researching where you think you might want to apply, and your documents, right? We want to make sure that the documents that are being submitted to these firms are as good as they can be. So I wanted to ask Angela from Seward and Kissel, can you talk a little bit about when applicants prepare their documents? Do you think that they should work on tailoring their documents to different places that they're applying, or even specific positions, or like areas of interest in like the field that they might want to work in?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Maria. It's something we look at is the cover letter, and sometimes there are template cover letters, and students will copy and paste, and sometimes say they're applying to the firm, but it's the name of another firm. So really be cautious when you're doing those merged letters to make sure you're identifying the firm you're actually applying to. You might want to highlight a practice area that has piqued your interest, and that's what's sort of conveying your interest in that particular firm. So it shows that you've done a little bit of due diligence, and you know that this is what practice, is a key practice at the firm, and not something like, for instance, you might be applying to New York, but it's really in their California office. So really be mindful of having all of that due diligence done, having your facts checked, having everything proofread, to the nines, your cover letter, your resume, just because it speaks to paying attention to detail, and we can't say that enough. You don't want to have a bad first impression by looking at a cover letter or resume and there's a typo on it, or more than one. And just consistency in the way you're reflecting your positions, the city and state, the dates on it, etc. But all of those things are important. Cover letters, resumes, potentially your first semester transcripts, depending on when you're applying for OCI, you will probably have your second semester grades. When you run into pre-OCI and potentially interviewing with firms before you have your second semester grades, I'm envisioning that they will ask you for those when you do get them, to potentially make a decision on your candidacy then, perhaps the end of May, early June. So just be expecting to get that request. And I think it was stated before by Yadida, when you do get involved in that pre-recruiting, you should expect that there's going to be a very quick turnaround, whereas firms want to know your decision sooner than perhaps if you were to interview at OCI, and they have to keep your offer open a little longer. So just really be mindful of that. Hope that helps.
Yes, great, thank you. Does anyone else, any other representatives on the call, have anything they'd like to add to that, kind of when we're preparing documents?
I always think it's helpful, and we appreciate if they just include a line about why they're interested in this law firm. Why are you interested in HSC? Why are you applying to us? So I think that, sentence, 2 sentences goes a long way. Great,
thank you. And other than like resumes, cover letters, writing samples, transcripts, references, are there any other documents that any of the firms request or look for?
I would say on occasion, if we've gotten to the callback stage, not for everyone, but occasionally our attorneys will ask to see a writing sample. So it's good to have one ready to go just in case. And I did want to speak a little bit to the previous question for Bonchenick and King, because we are participating with Albany for OCI. We'll be receiving your resumes and transcripts through that process, and we actually don't require a cover letter for the OCI participants through Albany. So as far as the tailoring, sometimes it's good to tailor your resume if you've done some work in the city that you're interested in. Maybe make sure that's prominent, or one of the first things they see, because we're going to scan and see if you've got ties to the area. And without that cover letter, it's good to just have it easily accessible on the resume.
Great, thank you. That's really helpful. Did any, oh, go
I
ahead.
also wanted to throw in, you know, if you are considering applying for like a diversity fellowship that usually runs concurrently with, you know, the recruiting season, you know, to just, I know, you know, people are probably applying to a bunch of them, but to make sure that your statement actually matches what, you know, the firm is asking, because people really do read those statements. So it's not like, you know, it's an exercise in futility. Like, we really do read them. They really are important. So, you know, try, you know, to keep the focus on whatever the prompt is. And I know it's annoying because we all ask different prompts. So apologies in advance. Maybe one day we'll all have the same prompt. But until then, you know, just keep that in mind that, you know, if you do just kind of use some sort of, you know, form essay, you know, it might impact your chances of being considered.
Thank you.
Just want to add quickly too that we did attach in the chat the description about the Cahill's Diversity Fellowship Program. And Bon Shenikin King also had provided some additional information for you.
Thanks, Meg. All right, unless anyone else has anything they want to add on those questions, we can move on a little bit about like looking and really doing research on the firm. So I was going to ask Sandra from Phillips Lytle, when students are looking and researching what firms they might want to apply for, like what should they look for in their research, and you know, how do we want them to like make an informed decision about the firms that they choose to apply to?
Sure. You know, I in thinking about this, I was thinking about a particular student who, for example, was interested in our litigation practice. And before I spoke to him on campus for the first time, he had really done a great deal of research on reported cases that were handled by the firm. And he had really looked at what we had done recently and significant cases over a period of time, so that when he talked about his interest in litigation, he was able to successfully tie it to what we were actually doing in the space that we were actually in. So what I'd encourage you to do is, if you do have a particular interest, take a look at what is publicly available, even beyond the website, as to what the particular firm has been doing. There's a lot of information about deals. There's a lot of information in the transactional space as well as litigation. The more you know, and the more that you can speak in an intelligent, informed way about the prospective employer, it can be very impressive. I mean, you want to tailor it. You don't want to come on too strong as if, you know, you're working there, but there is a great balance there of research that you can do beyond the website. I would call the website the minimum that I would do before talking to anybody, but I would certainly take a deep dive. And if you do get a call back, you are going to get a list of the attorneys that you'll be speaking with. You want to research those attorneys in advance and know who you're going to be talking to, so that at least you can anticipate what their perspective is. So I think the more research you do, the more comfortable you're going to feel going into the interview, and I think the more successful you will be.
Great, thank you. Does anyone else have anything they want to add about that? All right, so after a student has done that research and chosen, you know, where they might apply or the different firms that they're going to apply to, when they're maybe in the application or the interview process, should they be prepared to answer a question about why they chose that firm and why that specific geographic location? Megan, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. Kind of like I mentioned before, definitely. That is, I think I've always asked. So we are hoping that, you know, if you are hired at the end of the summer, you're going to have had a wonderful experience, and we're going to see, you know, great promise from you, and we'd love to extend an offer one day. Like, that's the dream situation. So we want to make sure that the people we hire for summer associate or for diversity scholarship, that they want to be here long term. And that's kind of the end goal of it, is we kind of have our eyes set on like the long-term planning. So we love to see things that indicate that you're interested in the area. And for us, Rochester, Buffalo, upstate New York, you're interested in our practice areas, and kind of like other people have mentioned that you've done research and are really interested and want to be here.
Great, thank you. I don't know if anyone else has anything they want to add to that.
I would just say, as far as, indicating your location, the location that you're interested in, especially with, firms having multiple offices, it is sometimes with bond a little bit questionable when we see somebody put, I'm flexible on location. That's, in some cases, it's really true. They've got, connections in all different areas or multiple locations, but I would be careful with I know it's good to be flexible, but we're looking for people who want to grow in that specific office.
Great, thank you. And while I was going to ask you this question as well, Jesse, when students are like, if they have a certain area of interest and your firm has like maybe a lot of different areas that you practice, would you encourage them to say, I would like to practice in this one area, or be more flexible and open to like talking about different areas that they'd like to practice or like to learn for the summer? If that makes sense. Sorry, you're still muted.
Yeah, it definitely can't hurt at all if you have a specific practice area of interest to indicate that in your interviews. I mean, hopefully you've done your research and you don't say a practice that we don't cover here. But we do a rotation, so you will want to be flexible to come into the program. It's great to have that in mind. And it's definitely good for us to know, but come flexible, because you're going to get exposure to all our different departments and practice areas, which is good, because sometimes you really don't know what or what you like until you've seen what kind of work is going to go into it, as opposed to studying it, seeing the kind of work you're going to get. A different practice area may totally pique your interest that you never thought would. So good to, if you have a practice area in mind, good to let us know, but keep an open mind.
Great, thank you. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to add about that?
I just had a thought on that. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Then Angela, you can go.
I think, we expect 2L students to probably have flexibility and sort of a desire to see all of these different practice areas. I think it's easier as a 3L to actually indicate a practice area that you want to pursue, as compared to writing to a firm and saying, I'll do anything that the firm does. At least for me, when I read that, it becomes a little harder to place somebody, because I don't really know what you're interested in doing. So at the 3L level, there's probably a little bit of a tipping point of wanting to hear what you'd like to do. Whereas for the summer, I think employers expect, as Jesse was just saying, this flexibility of, I want to see what's involved. We don't do a rotation, but we do make an effort to get work driven to you from all of our practice areas. So you want to have that open mind, but as Jesse said, if you're really committed to something, you want to be true to who you are and let the firm know that. If you know that you're only interested in practicing in a certain area and you are a 2L, it's okay to say it. That's what you're looking for.
Thank you. And Angela, I know you wanted to say something.
Yeah, so forgive me if this question is going to be coming up soon, but just tying together what was being said before, I think it's important to understand how assignments are allocated during the summer. So really to wrap your head around, is it an assignment system? Is it a free market system? Am I coming in and saying, you know what, this is what I want to do. This is all I want to do all summer. And I appreciate your firm and I'll do whatever, if there's a lot of capital markets assignments and you need me to take one, that's fine. But I really would love to have more assignments in this area. So that would be more free market versus a rotational program. If it is rotational, what practice groups are you going to have to rotate through and for how long? I think that's all really relevant information to get. And even back to, you know, before we were talking about investigating the firms on the website, they all sort of start looking the same. As you know, a 3L's lens on this would be so much different than a rising 2L as they go into this process into OCI. Really, again, doing that due diligence on the websites. If you see a practice area that looks exciting and wonderful, but you see that only 2 attorneys in that office are working in that practice area, you really want to be discerning and distill the information you're reading. You know, you'll see a lot of names pop in from different areas, like, oh, real estate, and then suddenly there's 10 names, but there's really only like 1 or 2 people that really do that work. So really, really distilling that information and really understanding the scope of the practice and the breadth of the practices at the different firms. So you're walking in with your eyes wide open, and it'll help when you're having your conversations to speak to the information you've been able to get from your, you know, due diligence and research. And I think that's going to jump into your next group of questions, which relates to reaching out to attorneys at the firm. And just to get ahead of that, but for a second, I think it's becoming more common now where students do reach out. They connect on LinkedIn with recruiters, with attorneys at the firms that are alum perhaps, and other attorneys in areas that they're interested in. But just to know that when they're reaching out to attorneys, they might have a higher probability of hearing back from an associate or junior associate, so to speak, versus a partner who's inundated probably with clients all day. So just to really, you know, have a keen eye out for that of, okay, I might not hear back from the partner, you might connect with them, send them an email, but your junior folks are the folks that more recently out who can speak to what the transition was like, what the summer experience was like, and might be able to respond, you know, in a much quicker fashion.
Thank you. Yeah, and that was one of the questions that we did want to get to was about reaching out to people at the firm. I mean, that obviously, I think that seems like it's a practice that is encouraged if a student like knew that there's an alumni or was able to get a contact. Would everyone agree that that's something that, you know, you would encourage the students to do? I don't know if anyone wants to speak to that.
I would definitely say that it's a good idea, particularly alums. I just want to speak to the rotation versus non-rotation. I'll tell you, just for me personally, I don't like to get that question at OCI because so many students ask it. And I feel like the student is sort of asking just to ask a question. If you can find that out by looking at the website, don't ask the question because it'll just look like you didn't do your research. So if you get an offer, you can find out if it's a rotation. To me, it's just a question that signals to me you're just asking the same question you asked the 12 prior. So think about your questions, ask what you're really interested in that you can't find otherwise available. And if you do make contact with somebody at the firm, either an alum or in a practice area that you're interested in, that's a place where you can ask those kinds of questions and about their practice. But I'll tell you, if you reach out to a lawyer here at Phillips Lytle, inevitably that lawyer then does get in touch with me to note the fact that you've done that, which is a good thing. So I'd encourage you to take a look for that kind of thing and be careful about how many people at the firm you are contacting, because know that everything you're doing is going to end up in one central spot, so that if you reached out to 10 people, it's not as meaningful perhaps as reaching out to 1 or 2.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to? Oh,
yeah,
go ahead. Thank you.
Go back and just provide some, you know, color to the other side. There are firms that do specifically hire targets for whether it's corporate or litigation. So if you are actually interested in a specific practice area, sometimes mentioning that could be very helpful to your cause. I know at Cahill, we specifically try to hire, we call targets, because obviously at the end of the summer, you still reserve, you still have the opportunity to say, okay, I thought I wanted to do litigation, but ultimately I want to do corporate. And so we're happy to, start you as a first year as a corporate associate. But when we do hire you, we do try to fill, X amount of litigation leading spots and X amount of corporate, spots. And so if somebody, if I were, let's just say down a few corporate slots and somebody sent me their materials and said, hi, I'm really interested in corporate, I would be much more interested in you over somebody who said they were interested in litigation. So I think, this can kind of go both ways. And I think it also, when you're looking at firms, to kind of think about, be strategic about how you present yourself. You know, I've worked at firms where, you know, it's 10 weeks and it's a generalist and you get to try everything and it's fantastic. And then, you know, you have so many interests, you don't know where you want to begin as a first year, but, you know, you have that opportunity. You know, Cahill, we have some specialty groups, but we, you know, specifically try to hire into, you know, litigation and corporate. So if you say, you know, you're interested in bankruptcy, sure, we have a bankruptcy group, but we really don't have a need for that sort of pipeline. So, you know, it might not work. But, you know, if you look at the firm and think about how they hire and who they're hiring, you know, some firms want to see generalists and some firms don't. So, you know, something to be mindful when you are applying, you know, just trying to think like the firm, you know, what are they looking for? You know, I've worked at firms where, you know, certain offices are only looking for people who are interested in like real estate finance. So, you know, if you are kind of set on something and you know what you want, then, you know, that could, you know, help you out.
Thank you. So it really goes back to researching and making sure they're doing the right the work and looking at the specific firm and not generalizing when they're doing their applications.
I think so.
All right. Does anyone else have anything they want to add about that? Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, just to, at least from my perspective, to put some of a point on that. Obviously, everyone's doing the diligence, the research, all good comments around. But I'll tell you, you know, we spend time on this. You know, it's a serious thing, and you should understand sort of your side of that narrative as well. Because I promise you, if you come in and you've got a transcript that has 57 tax 1, 2, tax 7 international tax classes, which by the way, I love you. But if you have that and you come in and say, you know, I'd like to do aviation law, I'm going to say, well, why is this? And how does that map up and marry? So, and it's fine. You may have that. You may say, I did it, I didn't want it, or I like this particular aspect, but you know, we're going to look at that and see how that is. I knew coming in, I was a transactional lawyer, and that was sort of how I shaped it. I personally, right, you know, you go to undergrad and your parents say, just go experience, see what's there. But, you know, you've made the time, the investment. It's not inexpensive to go to law school. You know, I think you sort of have something of an idea. And if sort of the paperwork doesn't match the story, it's not a death blow, but you should be prepared for that, because that clearly, we sort of take a look at that and I say, well, this is what everything looks like. You've been on this track and now you're sort of over here. So it's not insurmountable at all, but you should be prepared for that and have that narrative. And you know, to close that loop, we talked about sort of the generalist thing, but even though I like the team player and pitching in, and that happens at times when things are busy, but if you say I'll do whatever, it doesn't, you know, it feels like, hey, I need a job because my parents said I can't move home, which will get more to demonstrated interest. I'm sure we'll do a deeper dive later on the call. So, thanks.
Thank you. All right. So I do want to ask the student questions. It's kind of related, I think, to what we're talking about here. A student was asking about qualities or experiences that the recruiter has found helpful or beneficial in their work. And I think kind of maybe qualities or experiences that students have to offer, or and also any like qualities or experiences that they've had in their daily work experience. I don't know if anyone wants to speak to that a little bit. Go ahead, Angela. Oh.
I think of it as telling your story. You know, if you can tell your story really well and what you're bringing to the table from your lens of experiences you've had, that lend themselves to the experiences you have at a law firm, which are essentially problem solving, you know, the way you show up, you know, the way you interact with clients, communication styles, like things like that, how to be responsive, like all of those things that you might have learned at previous jobs that are not necessarily in the legal field. You know, if you can tell that story really well, if you've had some work experience before going to law school, you had work experience while you were in undergrad or while you're in law school, all of these things, you know, it's the way you're communicating that experience in your interviews. And I think that goes a long way. You know, I think at the end of the day, an attorney is interviewing you and wants to see, is this someone that's going to inspire my trust and confidence? Is this someone that's going to inspire the trust and confidence of my clients? How are they going to show up? Do I feel comfortable putting them in a room in front of, you know, 5 clients that are coming in for a meeting? So thinking about all of those things and conveying the message and telling your story of why you would be a great person to have on your team, I think, it is a great way to start thinking about the interview process. Not just having sort of a rote script of how you're going to answer just questions about the firm, but really thinking about the conversation and how to tell that story. And the authenticity just goes such a long way, because I can't tell you over the years how many times someone's come back and said, boy, I felt like they were reading a script. So really having that authentic interaction goes such a long way.
Thank you. So Sandra, did you want to, or Megan? Did
Yeah,
someone else want
I
to
was
speak
going
that?
to add a nice way to kind of distinguish yourself is to be able to talk about your writing sample in an intelligent way and to really think about your writing sample in advance. You don't want to get into a situation where you don't even know what writing sample you've included. The other thing I would say is, to the extent you're on a journal or you're doing writing on any kind of journal, be prepared to talk about why you selected that journal. Don't make it seem like I felt like this would be a credential, so I took it. And think about what you're writing and why it's important to you, and how to best discuss a legal issue so that you're demonstrating how you think. Those are, beyond your personal story, those are ways to demonstrate your intellect, how you think and reason, how articulate you are. And that's the kind of thing you can think about in advance and plan for without sounding programmatic, as Angela noted, because you really want to talk from a real place. So think about those things in advance and be prepared to discuss them.
Thank you. Megan, I saw you unmute. Did you want to add?
Just a really small little at the end, at the bottom of a resume, a lot of people put their interests, and our attorneys look at that, and it kind of adds a little fun to the conversation. It lightens it up. We had one candidate interested in pickleball, and one of the partners played pickleball, and it just kind of, again, brings a little bit of authenticity. You get to share a little bit about yourself, just to balance out the legal work and the academic. If you have something that you're interested, definitely include it. Why not?
Thank you. Yadida, did you?
I just also want to say, I think that sometimes people don't like to talk about their prior experiences, or they worry that, the jobs that they've had before and were not really relevant to, working at a law firm. But I think that some of our most successful attorneys are people who, can really demonstrate grit. And so, sometimes you've had a job, maybe you hold two jobs at once, maybe you were a waiter or a waitress. And, I think those sort of jobs, if you're going into, interviewing and, worrying that, maybe you don't have what to offer, I think that, in a lot of circumstances, those stories go a really long way. No one expects you to be an 8th year associate when you're going into, law school. And so I think that, that's part of your story, and that's usually very impactful, and you shouldn't try to hide it, because I think, what that shows us on our side is you're a hard worker, you will be a hard worker for the firm. And so there's a lot of ways to tell your story. So, just not to shy away from it. I remember I once had somebody who I think law school was their second career, and they had deleted about you could tell there were 6 years missing, and they were embarrassed to, I guess, talk about what they had done prior to going to, law school. And we all wanted to know what they did. And I think, people really are interested in who you are and, what you bring to the table. And, at least in big law, your work ethic is probably your most valuable asset. So, those sort of jobs that you've held that maybe you don't think as, so exciting, really are very impactful. And there are things that we look at when we are evaluating your materials. So don't be scared to talk about that as well.
Great, thank you. I am mindful of time, so we do want to talk a little bit about the interview process, and we don't want to get too much into, we've already talked a little bit about what some of the things you might think about when you're preparing to interview. But I don't know, Sandra, do you want to just give a brief overview of what the interview process looks like, specifically as part of the OCI program?
Sure. So at the OCI level, you'll probably meet on campus with either 1 or 2 lawyers from the firm, and you'll know who that is in advance. And that's a brief conversation, probably about 15 minutes long, 20 minutes long, that is now conducted remotely. So you have, without putting too much pressure on yourself, you have 20 minutes to try to connect and present yourself and think about the firm and how you want to come across as you prep for that, as we've been discussing. If you get a call back, at least here, you'll probably meet at least 4 partners and 2 associates. And I would tell you, even if you are connecting in a really personal, deep way, just remember the professional setting. It's a great feeling to connect with our interviewers. Our interviewers are terrific. So you will feel that comfort, but keep yourself in check. This is a professional interview, and again, you're meeting a total of probably 8 people, and you do have the opportunity to present yourself across a fairly deep period of time and enjoy it. You try to relax, try to just speak as you would if you met us in another context. And we all keep saying, be true to who you are. And I think just enjoying it and not kind of playing a character of a law student or what you think a first-year associate's going to look like. Be yourself, and that will come through and really, really serve you. And you'll do well, as I said earlier, if you've researched the people that you're talking to, you have some idea of what it is that they do. If you're not asking rote questions that sound that they're not authentic. But again, as with everything in law, I just think that enjoying it and maximizing the opportunity that you have is going to serve you incredibly well.
Thank you. And now if someone's not going through our program and it's, they're getting maybe asked for interviews outside of the OCI program, does anyone want to speak to like how that might look for their firm? I know Yadida, you mentioned that you guys do like with the pre-recruiting, maybe getting interviews beforehand. How would that look for a student?
So I think it's probably going to mirror the same OCI process. You'll probably have a screen. I think it's highly doubtful that someone is going to bring you in for a full round without having vetted you first. So it'll be a screen, generally like 1 partner, as you would at OCI, and then a full round would be the same as we would have for callbacks. So 2 associates, 2 partners, 30 minutes a person. At Cahill, we're all doing everything virtually, and should you receive an offer either through recruiting or OCI, you would have the opportunity to come visit our office and meet with some attorneys in person. We wouldn't expect you to make a decision without kind of seeing us in person at some point. So that's how it will go here.
Great, thank you. I know we had a few more questions we were going to maybe discuss about the interview process, but we only have about 5 minutes left for questions, so I do want to get to that. And really, I think we kind of covered a lot of the good information, and with the interviews, we'll do more on that for students too. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask. I know class is starting pretty soon, but if any students have any questions, we'd love to hear from you.
I have an additional thought that might be helpful for the students, which is the thank you note. If you are going to do it, try to tailor it to something that actually took place in the interview. Be careful of typos, look at it really carefully. Don't feel like you have to do it, but if you do it, try not to send something that looks like a canned thank you that isn't something that you prepared in response to what actually took place. And if you're seeing multiple lawyers in different sessions, I don't think you want to send the same thank you note to every person that you've met, because remember, all those things are going to wind up in one central place. And I think you'll serve yourself better if you tailor your thank you note to the people you saw and what you talked about.
Thank you. And I know we have a question from Selma. Go ahead.
So I just wanted to ask if you would consider a Spring Start student who would have basically 1 semester grades only, but sometimes they're non-traditional students who have substantial legal experience. Would you be open to considering that kind of candidate this time around before completion of all of the 1L classes?
I can speak for us. I know that we do. I assume my colleagues do as well.
Yeah, if you want to apply somewhere, I would say definitely do it. And I mean, we would consider you at Harder Seacrest Emory, so, or whoever person.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. All right, thank you so much to all of our representatives on the call. This was wonderful. I know we kind of got short on time, but we really appreciate your time, and I know the students certainly learned a lot from this. So thank you so much, and I know you'll be getting lots of applications when it comes time. All right,
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Good luck,
everyone.
everybody. Thank
thank
you.
you. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
You too.